The night should have been perfect. String lights draped across the backyard glowed like captured stars, laughter floated through the humid summer air, and champagne glasses clinked in every direction as my sister stood in her white lace gown, glowing with the kind of joy you only see in movies. I raised my glass high, smiling despite the knot in my stomach, determined to celebrate her day. But as I tilted my head back and took that first bitter sip, I noticed something that shattered me more than any broken glass ever could: a locksmith. Crouched by my parents' front door, twisting a drill into the deadbolt, sparks snapping in the shadows. And behind him, my new brother-in-law leaned casually against the porch railing, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on mine across the flickering lights. He lifted his glass too, smirking, and mouthed words that turned my blood cold. Gift secured. At first, I thought it was some sick joke. Maybe too much champagne. Maybe my imagination stretching things out of proportion. But then the music cut abruptly, the DJ lowering the volume mid-song as my parents shuffled nervously toward the arbor, holding a manila envelope with trembling hands. Their faces were pale, eyes darting between the guests and me. "Surprise," my mother announced, her voice straining to sound cheerful. "We've signed the deed. The house is our wedding gift to your sister." For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. My ears roared, like static swallowing the backyard. 7 years, 7 long years of me paying their mortgage, covering property taxes, fixing the roof when hail shredded it, wiring money each month with notes labeled Dad's mortgage or HOA fines. 7 years of sacrificing vacations, sleep, and half my own paycheck after Dad's stroke, because they swore, they promised, that one day this house would be mine. And now, with a smile plastered across her face, my mother was giving it away in a single sentence. I glanced at my father, praying for some kind of reassurance, some shake of the head to tell me this wasn't real. But he looked down, unable to meet my eyes. His voice cracked as he muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "You're strong. You'll be fine." The words cut deeper than any knife. My chest tightened as the crowd applauded, clinking glasses and cheering for the happy couple, while my entire world collapsed behind their laughter. I staggered away, stumbling through the French doors into the house I had fought to keep alive all these years. But it didn't look like my house anymore. The smell of fresh paint filled my lungs, the walls stripped bare of photos, the file drawers emptied of every receipt and letter I had meticulously saved. On the kitchen island sat a copy of the deed, notarized just last week. The bold words jumped at me like flames: gift transfer. My heart froze when I scanned further down and saw my own name printed neatly, listed as a witness. "I never signed this." Outside, the DJ shouted "kiss," and the crowd erupted in cheers as I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, desperate for someone, anyone, to recognize this for what it was: fraud, theft, betrayal. But the officer's voice on the other end was flat, detached, rehearsed. "Civil matter," he said. "Take it up with the court." He hung up before I could plead. I looked up as the locksmith's drill screeched through metal, sparks spitting against the night. The sound was like nails dragging across the last thread of my sanity. And then, through the open window, I heard my sister's laugh, bright, sharp, cruel. She clinked her champagne flute against her husband's and called out for everyone to hear, "Make sure they're mail forwards. We close Monday." Close? Close to whom? My thoughts spiraled. Houses don't just close unless there's a buyer, a sale, a deal already in motion. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself, sweat chilling my back as my vision tunneled. They hadn't just given the house to her. They were moving it, flipping it, turning my 7 years of sacrifice into some twisted scheme. My stomach twisted. I rushed back to the island, staring again at the deed, tracing the notary stamp, trying to make sense of how my name could be there when I never picked up a pen. My sister's laugh echoed again, but now it felt darker, heavier, almost rehearsed, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The crowd outside erupted in another cheer. Camera flashes went off, music swelled, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, my reality split in two: the happy suburban wedding everyone else saw, and the private horror unfolding right behind it. I gripped the counter edge so tight my knuckles turned white, forcing myself not to scream, not to explode in front of the guests who were still blissfully clapping for a couple in love. And then, in the middle of that chaos, I noticed something that made my entire body lock still. My new brother-in-law's phone, sitting face up on the counter. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The contact name glowed in bright, merciless letters: escrow Monday 9 a.m. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that word on the phone screen escrow and heard my sister's laughter echoing through the hollowed-out bones of the house. So instead of sleeping, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop glowing like a crime scene light and pulled out every scrap of evidence I had saved over the years. My life had been reduced to rows and columns, Zelle transfers with memo lines carefully typed out, dad's mortgage, bank drafts for property tax payments stamped by the county clerk, HOA fees paid to avoid liens. I had tracked every penny since the day my father's stroke left him unable to work. And every transaction was proof of the silent promise my parents had made. This house will be yours. Those words had been my compass. Now they felt like a new start at dawn. I drove straight to the title company listed on the deed copy. The lobby smelled like new carpet and stale coffee, and the receptionist gave me a bright smile until I said my name. The warmth drained from her face instantly, replaced by a polite but stiff tone. You're not on the seller side, she said quickly, almost like she'd rehearsed it. It's just your parents and your sister. My throat tightened. I've been paying the mortgage for years. I need to see the file. She shook her head firmly. I'm sorry, sir. I can't release anything to you. But as she pushed the folder back across her desk, a corner slipped open, and I caught a glimpse. I leaned in, reading upside down, my heart hammering. Buyer, Green Star Holdings LLC. Closing price, $280,000, easily $100,000 under market value. And listed as the agent of record, bold as a scar, my sister's fiancé. My pulse roared. I forced myself to stay calm, thanking her and walking back to my car like I hadn't just watched my life's sacrifice being bartered away like a pawn ticket. I opened my phone and dug deeper into the property record. That's when I saw it. 3 months ago, a HELOC draw had been pushed through under my father's name, $48,000. The lender? The fiancé's brokerage. He had set it up as a bridge loan. A bridge to what? Default. Because now the house wasn't just in play, it was already drowning. Payments had stopped. The foreclosure clock was ticking. The so-called wedding gift wasn't generosity at all. It was cover. I confronted my mother. She didn't answer my call but sent a voice memo, her voice brittle, like broken glass trying to hold together. He said investors would bail us out. He said you'd understand. We needed the money for the wedding. And the medical bills. We didn't think you'd fight us. I replayed it 3 times, trying to hear something else, some hint that she regretted it. But all I heard was betrayal. The woman who raised me had sold me out, convinced by a man she barely knew, because he spoke the right kind of slick. Desperate, I called the notary listed on the deed. The phone rang once before a young, cocky voice answered. Oh yeah, that's me, he said before I even finished introducing myself. Cousin of the groom, tight family. We take care of each other. He said it like a threat, like a warning that I was the only one outside the circle. By the time I pulled into my parents' neighborhood, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The sight waiting for me there made my stomach flip. The HOA president was already parked at the curb, clipboard in hand, her smile slicing into me like paper. Congratulations to your sister, she said sweetly, tapping her pen. Also, a new roof compliance is due in 10 days. If it's not fixed, fines will triple. Her tone was smug, rehearsed. I remembered suddenly her husband owned the biggest roofing company in the county. I gritted my teeth and scrolled my phone, pulling up the fiancé's Instagram. There they were, plain as day photos from his birthday. Him, the HOA president, her husband, arm in arm, laughing, champagne in their hands. A family of leeches dressed in designer clothes. I felt cornered, betrayed from every angle. My parents, my sister, the HOA, even the notary was in on the game. Everywhere I turned, the walls pressed tighter, suffocating me. That's when something tugged at the edges of my memory. A hiding spot from when I was a kid. The old attic vent where I used to stash comic books and a diary I prayed no one would find. My chest burned as I drove back to the house, every instinct screaming that I had missed something, that I wasn't out of weapons yet. The attic was hotter than I remembered, the air thick with insulation dust. I crawled forward on my knees, pushing aside cobwebs, and coughing into my sleeve. My fingers brushed against the loose vent cover, the one I had unscrewed 100 times as a kid. I pried it open, my heart pounding as I reached inside, half expecting to find nothing but the dusty remnants of my childhood. But instead, my hand hit paper. An envelope, thick, heavy. The handwriting across the front stopped me cold. It was my grandmother's, The words were written in her careful, slanted script, the kind she always used for letters she wanted to be remembered. "If I am gone," the envelope read, "open only if you kept your promise." My throat tightened as I clutched it against my chest. My grandmother had died 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but stories and a memory of her last whispered request that I take care of my father when she no longer could. I had kept that promise, every single month, every single payment. I had kept it, even when it nearly broke me. Now, here, in my shaking hands, was the one thing none of them could touch. A letter from the past, from the woman who had seen through everyone before I had. I stared at it in the dim attic light, my pulse hammering, my breath ragged, knowing that whatever was inside could change everything. It could be salvation. It could be destruction. But one thing was certain. It was my grandmother's voice reaching from the grave. And she had left it for me alone. And in that moment, as the party music thumped faintly outside, as laughter drifted in from a world that had already written me out, I realized the truth. The paper trail didn't end here. It was just beginning. The envelope shook in my hands as if it carried the weight of the grave itself. My grandmother's handwriting, delicate, slanted, precise, was etched across the front like a whisper from another world. "Open only if you kept your promise." I tore it open with trembling fingers, and inside, the air seemed to still. It was a will, a handwritten document dated a single month before Grandma passed. The ink faded but legible, the words searing into my brain. "If any grandchild supports my child, your father, for 12 consecutive months," it declared, "my home shall vest in that grandchild by constructive trust." My eyes blurred, my pulse hammering so loud I could barely hear myself breathe. And then, tucked neatly against the fold, a post-it note in her unmistakable tidy script, like she had planned this moment with surgical precision. "You kept the lights on. You kept the house warm. It should be yours." I nearly dropped it. For years I had thought I was alone, that my sacrifices existed in a vacuum, unnoticed and unrewarded. But she had seen it all. She had anticipated this very betrayal. And she had left me a weapon. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted across the street to a neighbor I had known since childhood. A man who had once been the bulldog of the county courthouse before retiring, but who still kept his suits pressed and his shelves stacked with leather-bound law books. I slammed the will down on his table, barely able to speak through my ragged breaths. He scanned the document, his sharp old eyes narrowing, and then he looked up with something almost like fire. "We file a lis pendens today," he said, his voice like steel. Quiet title. "Temporary restraining order to freeze escrow. You're not out yet. Not if this is real." He moved like a storm, papers flying, pens scratching, his phone buzzing nonstop as he barked orders to clerks he still knew by name. By lunch we had filed the suit. By afternoon, we had the order in hand. The wedding flowers in my parents' backyard hadn't even wilted yet, and already the sale was bleeding from the first cut. The first hearing came fast, set within days. I walked into the courtroom clutching my grandmother's will like a lifeline, the courthouse walls closing in with their sterile cold. My sister arrived dressed in white, her veil still pinned from the wedding, as if she wanted to flaunt her victory in front of the judge. Her husband, the fianc I could no longer stomach calling by name, carried a leather folio and a grin stretched too wide to be anything but rehearsed. He swaggered to the table and with a flourish, dropped a document in front of the judge. "Power of attorney from our dear narrator," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false charm. He even winked at me like this was a game, like he knew exactly how to twist the knife. I froze as my attorney slid the document toward me. My stomach turned violently. It was my signature. My name scrawled across the bottom of a page giving my mother full authority to transfer the house. But I never signed it. I knew my signature like I knew my own heartbeat, and I never used my middle initial. Yet here it was, printed boldly in black ink, a version of me that never existed. The judge leaned forward, his eyes sharp beneath his glasses. "This is notarized?" he asked carefully. The fianc nodded with practiced ease. "Of course," he said, his smile oozing confidence. "Same family notary. We keep things close." The judge arched a brow, tapping his pen slowly against the desk. "Odd," he murmured, "how close family is to a lot of these papers." His tone cut through the air, and for the first time, the fianc's grin faltered. My attorney pounced, demanding subpoena of the notary log and the surveillance footage from the UP store where the signature was supposedly witnessed. Hours later, the evidence arrived in a brown manila envelope. We played it on a small grainy screen before the court, a short, bearded man with shifty eyes leaning over the counter, signing my name in an uneven scrawl. He gripped the pen with his left hand. I felt my jaw tighten as I turned my own hand palm up for the judge. My right hand, steady, dominant. I am right-handed. I had never, not once in my life, signed with the left. The courtroom murmured, whispers rippling like cracks in a frozen lake. The fianc barely flinched. He leaned back, shrugging with a smirk, as if forgery was nothing more than spilled milk. Everyone makes mistakes, he said casually, dismissing years of sacrifice and evidence with a single smug sentence. My fists clenched under the table, my nails digging crescents into my palms. But I forced myself to stay silent, to let the evidence bleed him dry. The judge scribbled notes, his frown deepening with every word. The walls of their scheme were starting to crumble, brick by fraudulent brick. When the hearing adjourned, I staggered into the hallway, my nerves fried, my body buzzing with both adrenaline and rage. My sister swept past me without a glance, her perfume sharp and nauseating, her husband whispering something smug into her ear. I wanted to chase them down, to scream in their faces about loyalty, about family, about the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. But before I could, I felt a tug on my sleeve. My mother, her eyes red, her hands shaking, slipped something small and heavy into my palm. An old brass key tarnished and cool against my skin. Taped to it was a scrap of paper in her familiar handwriting. 5 words that made my blood run cold. Bank box. Your father tried to fix it before the wedding. My throat locked. I stared at her, searching for answers in her tear-brimmed eyes, but she turned and shuffled away before I could speak. I stood frozen in the courthouse hallway, clutching that key as if it were a detonator, knowing that whatever lay behind the steel door of that box could burn this entire story to ash or save me from drowning completely. The key felt heavier than it should have, its brass edges digging into my palm as if daring me to use it. I barely slept that night, and by morning I was standing at the bank, my nerves a taut wire ready to snap. The manager, a tall man with thinning hair and a voice that seemed allergic to urgency, led me down the sterile corridor into the vault room. My heart slammed against my ribs with every step, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects overhead. When he turned the key and slid open my father's box, I expected deeds, receipts, maybe a stack of old bills. Instead, what I found made my knees buckle. A small digital recorder, a folded county slip stamped with the official seal, and a letter scrawled in my father's shaky handwriting. My fingers trembled as I hit play. The static crackled for a moment, then my father's voice filled the tiny concrete room, tired and frail but painfully clear. We recorded a deed adding you as joint tenant months ago, he confessed, his voice breaking on every other word. Your mother wanted to surprise you after the wedding, but your sister cried, and I got weak. We filed a rescission. I don't know if the clerk processed it. I'm sorry, son. My chest caved in. He had tried. He had actually tried to do the right thing before letting guilt poison him. The county slip confirmed it. It was stamped, dated 2 months before the so-called wedding gift, showing that the deed adding me had been recorded. My father's confession meant that if the rescission hadn't gone through, then legally, despite everything, the house wasn't theirs to give away. It was already mine. My hands shook as I shoved the recorder and slipped into my bag, adrenaline burning through my veins. I drove straight to the county recorder's office, bursting through the double doors and demanding a search. The clerk, a woman with horn-rimmed glasses and the kind of monotone that comes from decades of bureaucracy, scrolled through the records on her screen. Original deed recorded, she said calmly. Rescission submitted, but rejected for missing initial on page 2. My heart slammed against my ribs. She turned the monitor toward me. There it was, the official rejection notice. The rescission had never taken. The house was mine, not in theory, not in fantasy. In the eyes of the law, I staggered outside into the blinding sun, my phone buzzing in my pocket. Unknown number. I answered, breathless. A cold male voice spoke. Seller failed to disclose list pendants, the caller said without pause. This is Green Star Holdings. We already wired $48,000 non-refundable. We'll get it back one way or another. The line went dead. My fingers hovered over my phone as I looked up the LLC. It was a shell, nothing but paperwork and smoke, registered to a mailbox at a UP store. The agent of record? My sister's fianc. The address listed? The Hoa President's P.O. Box. My pulse raced so fast I thought I'd pass out. The circle of betrayal was complete. The fianc, the Hoa president, the notary, they were all tied together in a web spun to choke me out of everything I had bled to protect. By nightfall, the locks had been changed again. My parents sat huddled on the porch, their faces pale in the glow of the sheriff's flashlight. A 72-hour notice had been stapled to the front door, citing nuisance and construction. I ripped it down, my hands shaking, the words blurring under my rage. Through the window, I saw her, my sister, phone in hand, recording us like we were squatters on the evening news. Her husband leaned in close, whispering with a grin that made my skin crawl. Let the internet see who really deserves this house. They weren't just stealing my home. They were rewriting the story for an audience, turning me into the villain in a play I never agreed to star in. I stepped off the porch, my fists clenched so hard my nails cut into my palms. My phone buzzed again. My attorney's voice cut through the chaos. Judge wants a final hearing. Monday, 9 a.m. Bring everything. The will, the recorder, all of it. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, though my throat was too tight to answer. My chest felt like it was filled with cement, every breath a struggle between rage and despair. Then, behind me, the roar of tires screeched across asphalt. A pickup truck idled at the curb, headlights glaring into my back. A man in a hoodie leaned out the window, his face shadowed, his voice low and venomous. Wrong fight, spreadsheet. He spat into the gutter before flooring the gas, the truck disappearing into the night. On his head gleamed a cap embroidered with the name of the roofing company, the one owned by the Hoa president's husband. The walls of this conspiracy weren't just closing in, they were pressing against my lungs, suffocating me with every move. But I refused to choke. I refused to fold. Monday was my battleground, and for the first time, I had real weapons: my grandmother's will, my father's recorded confession, the rejected rescission. They had forged signatures, manipulated my parents, and bled the house dry. But in the eyes of the law, I was the rightful owner. The house wasn't theirs to give. It wasn't theirs to sell. It wasn't theirs to use as a pawn in their rigged little game. The weekend crawled by like a fever dream, every shadow a threat, every knock at the door a spike of fear. I didn't know if the fianc's threats would materialize into something worse. I didn't know if my sister would stop at humiliation or try to take something even more permanent. But when Monday came, I stood outside the courthouse with my evidence clutched like a shield. At 8:57 a.m., the second hand ticking louder than my heartbeat, I laid the recorder and my grandmother's will on the counsel table. My palms were sweaty, my lungs burning, but I had never felt more certain. Then the doors opened, and in he came the fianc, striding with a swagger that reeked of arrogance. At his side was the Hoa president, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword. He carried a fresh folder, bold black letters stamped across the front, emergency guardianship. My stomach dropped into my shoes. The fianc strutted into the courtroom like a man who already owned the verdict, his shoes clicking against the polished floor as though every sound was a declaration of victory. In his hand was a folder thick with freshly printed papers, and when he reached the table, he leaned close enough for me to feel his breath as he whispered, "You can have your little will. We have something better." He pulled the documents free with a theatrical flourish, sliding them across to the judge as though he were presenting treasure. "Emergency guardianship," he announced, his voice oily, triumphant. The room seemed to tilt as I read the words. Guardianship of my parents filed less than 24 hours earlier, alleging that they were no longer capable of managing property and that control should pass to him as the trusted family by marriage. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just trying to take the house, he was trying to seize my parents themselves like assets to be leveraged. The judge's jaw tightened as he flipped through the folder, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Sir," he said slowly, his voice heavy with restrained disbelief, "you are not even related by blood. And this was filed yesterday?" His tone cracked the fianc's confidence like a hammer against glass. For the first time, the grin faltered. My attorney rose, his voice calm but edged like a blade. "Your Honor," he said, sliding forward the county slip and the recorder. "This is all smoke and mirrors. My client was added to title to months before this so-called gift. The rescission was rejected. The later transfer is void. And this guardianship ploy is nothing more than fraud stacked on fraud." The judge's gaze flicked to me as I placed the recorder on the table with shaking hands and pressed play. My father's broken voice filled the silent chamber, confessing his attempt to put my name on the deed, confessing his weakness, his regret. The words echoed through the room, each syllable a weight pressing down on every listener. You could hear people stop breathing. When the recording ended, the judge leaned back in his chair and turned his eyes toward my sister, who sat rigid in her white dress, as if still clinging to the illusion that this was her wedding stage. "Did you know about this?" he asked, his voice soft but cutting. My sister's eyes dropped to the floor. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak, and then she looked up, her tears hard as glass, her voice as flat as a blade. "Mom said he would forgive. He always forgives." My chest clenched as the words sank in not sorrow, not regret, but the cruel certainty that they had counted on me to bend, to break, to fold myself into their lies. Because that's what I'd always done. The notary was called next, his hands trembling as he took the stand, his face slick with sweat. I just did a favor for the family," he stammered, eyes darting anywhere but mine. The upstore footage played on a loop, the grainy video showing the short, bearded man scrawling my name with his left hand, a body shape and height that wasn't mine. The evidence was undeniable, and yet my sister didn't flinch, didn't blink, as though she had built armor out of indifference. When the footage stopped, the judge's voice cut the air like winter wind. "Fraud on the court. Deed voided. Constructive trust in favor of the petitioner. Temporary restraining order made permanent. Title quieted." Gasps rippled through the room, whispers swelling into a tide of disbelief. The HOA president slipped out the side door like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. The Fianchi's face drained to ash, his arrogance collapsing in an instant. Deputies closed in, flanking him as a state investigator stepped forward, reading off the charges in a voice as sharp as a gavel. "You're under arrest for notary fraud, wire fraud, and attempted elder exploitation." The shackles clinked as they locked around his wrists. The sound like music to me, yet hollow, incomplete. I turned toward my parents, expecting relief, expecting gratitude. But what I saw broke me in ways no forged paper ever could. My mother's lips quivered as she whispered, "Your sister has always felt second." My father, his eyes wet, nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "We thought you'd save us either way." In that moment, the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. They hadn't just gambled the house. They had gambled me, my love, my loyalty, treating it as collateral they could risk because they assumed I'd always cover the debt. I signed the judge's order with a shaking hand that afternoon, granting my parents a life estate so they could stay under the roof they had nearly lost. Though the weight of betrayal pressed down with every pen stroke, I paid off the HELOC to kill the noose that had been tightening, terminated the HOA's bogus violations in writing, and changed the locks again. The house was safe, but it felt more like a fortress than a home. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the worn paper of my grandmother's will. For the first time, I noticed a faint line at the bottom in her neat cursive, hidden beneath the fold. My throat tightened as I read the words that had waited silently for me all this time. Property is a house. Family is a home. Choose wisely when they split. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had chosen the house, but at what cost? At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a final text from the Fianc before his number went dark in county. "Round 2. You took the house." I took the buyer list. My blood chilled as I stared at the words, realizing his claws stretched further than I could see. Weeks passed in a haze of repairs and paperwork, but the shadow never left. One morning, I noticed a black SUV crawling past my curb at dawn, its tinted windows reflecting the rising sun. A week later, a new sign sprouted on my neighbor's lawn. Short-term rental luxury stay. The owner of record? Green Star Holdings, a new address across town. The empire he had built hadn't burned down with one arrest it had spread. I mowed my parents' yard at sunrise, the sprinklers ticking like metronomes in the silence, my sister's wedding photos still hanging on the porch wall, their colors fading in the sun. I had won the house, yes, but I had lost the story I had told myself about my family. The one where love was unconditional and loyalty was unbreakable. And still, under the weight of the keys in my pocket, under Grandma's last warning, I understood the twist I had never seen coming. The real theft wasn't the deed. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the years of sacrifice they had erased with a signature. The real theft was the belief that love could survive being used as leverage. And somehow, after all that, still feel the same.